So Rebecca is here with us again today, and Rebecca did an excellent job of walking us through English as a second language conversation circles, how we can prepare for them, how we can host them, and really just to encourage everyone to do them. And there were a couple of questions that came up inside and outside of the workshops, but more necessarily across all three. So we're just going to go over some of those questions and make sure that everything that can possibly be answered is answered. The first question for you, Rebecca, is what do you recommend for the learner/volunteer ratio in a group?
That's a great question. And every week it might change because you don't know how many learners and volunteers might attend each week. Ideally, it's nice to have volunteers work with a partner volunteer. It's just nice because having two people can help the conversation flow. If an issue arises or someone needs help with something, maybe the other volunteer can have a little side conversation.
And then how many learners for those one or two volunteers?
I find to have a conversation that can include everyone, maybe having somewhere between 2 to 4 learners at the same time, because anything more than that can be sometimes a little difficult to include everyone in the conversation. But it can, if you have a session where all of a sudden you have lots and lots of learners show up and you have to make your groups larger, don't sweat, don't worry about it. But just make sure the volunteers are conscientious then that they're working in a larger group, and to maybe try and engage someone who's a little quieter, or to maybe ask a direct, a friendly, easy, direct question to someone who's maybe a little quieter, just to make sure that everyone does feel included and is part of that conversation. If there are only 1 or 2 volunteers from the hosting congregation, would you recommend inviting non-Lutheran English speakers to join as volunteers to increase the volunteer ratio?
So my answer to that is absolutely. As long as you have somebody who's coordinating it and is able to kind of set the tone and also introduce other volunteers to your space, I think that's a great opportunity for you to invite people to the church, to invite people to work with you, and to see what you're all about in terms of helping your community. And so yes, my answer is yes. What are some important qualities for an effective volunteer?
Also another really great question. I think I addressed this a little bit in our workshops, is someone who is a good listener, someone who likes to be, or someone who likes to be chatty. Both have a great role to play in conversation circles. But also, I would encourage someone who has patience, who is friendly, who enjoys meeting new people. We're going to be meeting people with different ideas, different customs, and just from maybe different walks of life. And we want to make sure that we're always respectful and open and just really appreciative of differences. And so someone just sort of with a great attitude would be a great volunteer.
What do you recommend for the evaluation process?
Yeah, I think each conversation circle would have to start with maybe setting their own goal. What are they looking for? Is it do they want to have a goal of reaching out to 5 to 10 people in the community? Do they want to have more? Is it we want to make sure we have conversation circles once a week or twice a week? Determine what your goals are before you start, and then I would encourage you to, after, give yourself and be patient with yourselves. Don't look after the first 1 or 2 and say, oh my goodness, we did or didn't reach our goals. Be patient, give yourself some time, and maybe after a couple months, go back and look. What were our goals? Are we meeting them? Maybe you want to change your goals. Maybe your conversation circle has taken a different direction than what you first imagined. But yeah, I would say start before you begin by creating what your group's goals are, and then reflect.
Just a follow-up question too, like, do you have any type of guidance over what type of a feedback mechanism to use? And then if you do, do you collect feedback from both the volunteers and the learners, or are you just, like, what's your recommendation there?
I think if you were to collect feedback from the learners, you want to make it very simple and you don't want to overwhelm them, especially because this is a conversation circle where we're focusing on our listening and speaking skills, and someone's reading and writing might not be the same, their skills might not be the same as their listening and speaking. So you may have some people who are really comfortable maybe filling out a little survey, and other people who are not at all. So I would be careful in how frequently and what kind of questions you ask, because you don't want to burden or overwhelm your learners. Perhaps an easy way may just be, on a scale, do you find the time, does the time of Mondays at 10 a.m., is this good? Does this time work for you? And then yes, no, maybe like a little scale, or yes, sometimes, no. Make it as easy as possible. I also would then include like some emojis, like for a yes, a smile, a no, a frown, just to sort of help with some visual cues for answering questions. Sometimes it might be easier just to include some of those questions in your conversations. And also, often the learners, at least this is my anecdote here, is often they're quite willing to share their ideas, or will let you know if something's not working. If something's maybe not quite right for them, they'll let you know.
Okay. So to sum up, it would be good to maybe have formal surveys or formal feedback collected from your volunteers, and leave a more open, kind of less formal, conversational type allowance for your learners.
Can you talk a bit about boundaries and how to establish them at the beginning, up front, so that everyone is in a safe and comfortable working space?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about that in one of the workshops, and just you had mentioned, just how far can one go if somebody is needing help or assistance, especially when your learners are new to the country, new to the community, and maybe they're seeking support for different things. So upfront, having some resources that you mentioned in a workshop that might be available, either that be bus schedules, links, and knowing where to direct people should they have issues. So that would be for community support systems. Then that way you don't find yourself getting sucked in and maybe overextending yourself as a volunteer, and being comfortable with saying, I don't, even if you do know a little bit about something related to community support and resources, it's better to, point people in the right direction, give them the experts, access to experts, rather than try to solve these things by yourself. And then that will allow you to set up those healthy boundaries and keep them.
Are there any legal or safety concerns that we should address?
Yeah, so this kind of goes hand in hand with having a code of conduct document prepared. So we do provide a template on our website, and in our links with some of those resources, and that just allows you to have kind of set that tone right up front, so that the expectations are that everyone be respectful, that everyone treat each other with kindness, that we, both learners and volunteers have a code of conduct to follow too, but then also making sure that there are signs for, where the exits are in your building, what needs to happen if there is an emergency, making sure your volunteers are really well prepared. And if at all possible, if you have someone in your group who is licensed or certified in first aid, that's wonderful. Not necessary, but also a benefit, as it would be with hosting any other event in your church building. We talk about the vulnerable sector check, and that is a requirement every group should have. Most churches in the Lutheran Church Canada church body already have abuse prevention officers assigned to their congregation, and they are following the Plan to Protect guidelines as set out by Lutheran Church Canada Synod's office. But if that's not something you're doing right now, then it is something to look into, having an abuse protection policy in place and making sure that what you're doing within your space, whether it's conversation circles or otherwise, is following your abuse prevention protocols, and that they know who the officers are should they need to report any event and what to do in an event. And that kind of brings me to another thing. A question that had come up before was like, what do you collect on the registration forms? What kind of information should be there? So from my perspective, and you can answer this one too, great to have an email address for people. So some way to reach out to them, either a phone number or email address, and that allows you to text them if there's going to be a closure last minute or due to weather or other circumstances, but also then if they are willing to do surveys, there's an avenue for doing that through the Google Forms and stuff like that. So we also had what kind of advertising and what kind of tips we could give. So I'll let you start to answer that one.
Sure. Well, I think when you start forming your conversation circle, you might have an idea of what kind of learners. Maybe you have a specific group in mind, and so I'd start with maybe sharing your information where that group might be, or within members of that community or group. Some ideas are, I know some people really enjoy using different forms of social media to connect with their community. What's nice about when you do things digitally is the learners can use translation apps. So they might not understand all the information, but they can easily use a translation app to go through it and find everything. So that's a great way to reach out. Maybe even creating your own website for your conversation circle. There's a lot of free hosting sites out there. It's great because then if you have a nice link to your own website, you can keep all your information there, have links. Also a great way for learners to be able to connect, send in questions or comments, or maybe you have to have a cancellation because it's a snow day and it's not safe to come in. How great to have a space where you can automatically post that information. And again, if you are going to have a snow day cancellation, make sure you send an email out from those registration forms, just letting everyone know that it's not happening that day.
Okay. Now, along the lines of the digital advertising, one thing to keep in mind is if you're using Facebook and you put information embedded in a picture, it can't be translated. So having pictures is great because that attracts attention, but also allows people to see things that even if they can't read English, but then having the text portion of it below the image or outside the image so that they can use translation to help them understand what's being said. And then if you're Instagram side, you can't copy and paste, right? Sometimes you can't just hold your finger on it and copy that text, so it requires a lot of reworking. So just things to keep in mind based on what type of technology you're using. I love the idea of a website or a page on your website that is specifically for that conversation circle. Can you give us an idea of materials and resources that we should have available and where we might be able to find them?
Yeah, great question. Great materials to have are maps of maybe your city, your province, the country, the world. They are so helpful in conversations, pointing someone in the right direction or talking about where they've been or something they've seen. Those are available all over. If you're a CA member, I think you can get some maps from there for free, at least of your province and your city. I also always encourage notepads for all the groups and pens, because it's so easy to draw a picture or write a word or to draw directions for somewhere. Those are really useful. Dictionaries are always useful to have. both ones with written words as well as picture dictionaries. But one thing that I always really encourage is when we are providing any sort of resource for the learners and for conversation circles is to really make sure that the resources that we're sharing are geared for adults. We don't want to bring in resources that are for children because we're working with adults who come with a whole lifetime of education and experience and knowledge and wonderful things who are just they're learning another language. So we want to make sure that what we are providing is geared for adults. Go to your local bookstore. You can try Amazon. It's just nice to have a little look through sometimes to see what's available. Your library might be able to point you in the right direction, or maybe they have resources there that they share that maybe you can even borrow. Those are always great places to find the resources.
If you could help us kind of visualize what the learning space should look like, what that physical space should look like.
Yeah. In the conversation circle I've been involved in, what I found worked really well was kind of imagine almost like a coffee shop setup with tables. We had usually groups of 4, almost like a card table style, where you could sit. If you needed to add an extra chair or two, you absolutely could, but sitting in little table groups, because then each conversation can take place at their own table group. Not so much like a classroom style setup, because the one thing to keep in mind is if you're going to have a room full of lots of conversation groups, it's going to get loud. So it's nice if everyone can kind of sit together in a smaller group, and then it's easier to listen and to have those conversations. So yeah, I would sort of think a cafe. Think little table groups with 4 or 5 seats. The other thing, sort of with room setup, that I didn't really address too much in the workshops is it's always great when you come in to have a welcome table where you'd have your registration, where everyone can get their name tag. Great. But the other thing, and this is something that I know I need the reminder for, is to have someone within your volunteer team to maybe give like a 5-minute like a little bell or a little gentle interruption. 5 minutes left, so people can know it's time to start ending their conversations.
How would you handle varying levels of English skill proficiency in the group?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. In the conversation circle I belonged to, we did not. We set up table groups, and then we allowed learners to come in and choose whatever table group that they wanted to sit with for that week, and have conversations in that group. I did call around to other conversation circles to see how they ran theirs, and none of the ones that I contacted divide learners up by skill ability. And I do agree with that for several reasons. The first is that how would we divide them? That means we would have to have an assessment of some way to determine listening and speaking skills. Well, we're not trained for that. We don't have. I know I certainly wouldn't feel comfortable assessing someone's skills. So I don't know how we would even successfully do that. So I would just see how your group evolves and see what the needs of your group are. But the one thing I would strongly discourage is from doing any sort of assessment or judgment of someone's skills. That I would not do at all. One that came in was asking about using ESL conversation circles as a platform to share the gospel. Do you have any tips or some ideas of how to integrate faith sharing into conversation circles?
Yeah, so I have some opinions, and I'm also open to hearing from others who are using English as a second language as a form of outreach. But from our perspective, in the way that we were sharing this summer, with your help, was that this is an offering by you as a congregation, to your community, to demonstrate your love for the neighborhood. So to shine the light of Christ to your neighbors by offering a service to your community. And we know there are, well, we talk about that in the workshops, but the face of our communities is so diverse. And so it's just an opportunity to say, hey, we know that there are people out there who want this support, and we have a great place to host that kind of support. And by doing so, we are reaching out to our community to say, in love, we are serving you. And as Christians, we are called to serve our neighbor. We're called to love our neighbor. And so I think that's my answer to that question. It's our objective was not to say, hey, here's something you can do in order to, as a vehicle for outreach per se, but with all of the other things that we do where we're looking specifically, I can give the example of the conversation, the spiritual conversation curve that looks at, just allowing any conversation to be a faith conversation. Well, if you're having conversations, then those might evolve into faith conversations about your spiritual life. You're sitting in a church and you're a volunteer here, and if somebody asks you the question, do you attend to this church? Then your answer would be yes. And why do you attend this church? Or what do you find good about this church? Or do you like your faith? And so those conversations, I pray, will happen naturally. And we do have materials that could support people should they ask questions about your faith. So, for example, there's a great pamphlet called What Lutherans Believe. It has been translated into French and also translated into Chinese, so the simplified Chinese. So that is possible to share that with people, but it's in English too, and it's a very short pamphlet, and it's very direct and not very wordy. So if somebody asked you, why do you attend this church, or what is the Lutheran faith, what is this Lutheran church all about, then the English version might be a take-home they could use. There's also Lutheran Hour daily devotions. So those devotions, you can get them on an app on your phone, or you can download them off the website. You can also listen to them. So I know just from my own experience, I have a goddaughter in Nicaragua, and she's trying to learn English and practice her English. And so I send her the daily devotions. So, and then point out that not only can you listen, but you can follow along the written word. So that would be also a tool that people could use if they're like, I want to hear and see the words in front of me. They can listen while reading along, and then that can help enforce the English language. So those are some tools that are available out there that if that naturally occurred, they could use, that are resources that we have. We also have printed booklets. We have past editions of Lenten, like seasonal devotions and Advent devotions, which are great places to tell the story of salvation, especially Lent. So if that was something that just came out of your English conversation circles, that would be a tool you could use. All right. Well, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for coming in and doing this follow-up. Thanks for helping us with these workshops this summer. It was just wonderful and valuable to have your experience and your tutelage for us. And we're just really grateful to be able to partner with people who know what they're talking about, because we think this is a really valuable service for people.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice to get to talk about English conversation circles or cafes, whichever way you want to call it. I enjoyed my time as a volunteer in one so much, so it's been so nice to get to talk about it. And hopefully we'll hear about some success of some conversation cafes or circles from someone who's attended a workshop.
Yeah. Thanks very much.